Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Allie K. Dakers, teacher, actor, director, and producer, as she shapes the development of her innovative middle school drama club and guides her students' idiosyncratic artistic journeys. Today, we will be focusing on the February 27th Drama Club meeting. And since the auditorium was unavailable due to the high school musical, the Drama Club meeting moved to the cafeteria. And as it turns out, the location was actually the perfect one for the day's pitch meeting. Now, speaking of pitch meeting, it is likely the reason why the attendance soared to just about 30 kids for this particular session. So throughout the warm-up exercises, many kids took it upon themselves to assume a leadership role by encouraging their peers to stay focused and quiet when appropriate. So we see, I think, that they're gradually taking over more and more of the role that Allie initially held, and it's shifting bit by bit by bit. And also, as you pointed out in our discussion, Allie, really showing how they're demonstrating an understanding of the chain of command concept. So could you briefly remind us when being able to understand and follow that chain of command really comes into play and makes all the difference in the world?
Yeah. I feel like the most obvious is when we are working backstage and we have prop masters and kids should not be touching things if they are not the prop master. Only prop master touches props, etc. Stage management type issues that have to be sort of hierarchically passed down to make everything kind of run smoothly. But in this new phase that we're entering into, the writing phase, it also plays a role here, because oftentimes I'll have a lead writer on a scene. Maybe it was their idea, and so they are the lead writer. If they choose to accept that challenge, they want to have that. If they really feel strongly about their idea. And I have had this happen in the past where, I've had like a sixth grader who's the lead writer, but it's a big scene, so we break up into different little smaller groups to kind of manage parts of a scene or one bit of dialogue or maybe an entire scene of a larger play, because this idea actually was multiple scenes within. It was almost like a one act, like a short one act. So what would then happen is everyone would bring all those ideas back, and she would kind of be the leader of that group and decide, this is great, this is not great, blah, blah, blah. Go ahead and change this. No, this character should really be doing that. And if you don't understand, like, well, I love my idea needs to be in it, you being a person on a writing team, you need to learn to defer to that lead writer. And I mean, it might seem a little bit counterintuitive or counterproductive to what I've been saying all along, is build these leadership skills, all of this. But at the same time, real life scenarios, we have hierarchical situations happening, and they need to be able to function with grace, with ease in those situations as well. So understanding your role is really what will bring success to any group endeavor, I think, is kind of what we're starting to really understand here.
Well, it's interesting because a leader does not always lead every single moment. This is not a static role. It's a fluid and dynamic role, and you need to be able to do all kinds of different things and to know when it's appropriate for which kind of hierarchical position you're in. So I think it's a great skill, as you say, to learn, especially when the instinct is, no, I really want to keep ownership of my idea and do everything I can to put it forward. Well, you know, in the real world, there are all kinds of obstacles to doing that, as we well know, and perhaps learning how to navigate those circumstances here, one would hope, would have a lot of benefit for them in many settings.
Yeah, and cultivate the flexibility. You know, your place within any role, within any larger context will change, and to be able to flow with that is key.
Exactly, exactly. So before things really got going, Allie informed the kids that this would be more of a sit-down meeting, so to speak. So she encouraged them to join what she calls a silent dance party as a way of discharging whatever excess energy they may have, so that they are able to focus on this big pitch meeting ahead. So before they actually began this eagerly awaited segment, Allie decided to pull back the camera, so to speak, and encourage the kids to think about the purpose of participating in the theater, leading them to consider why we do theater, why should we care about theater, and to think about the potential power of both individual and collective voices within the context of the theater. So, Allie, what did you say to the kids to help facilitate their understanding of the power and the purpose of theater?
Well, I initiated the conversation with a question. What is the purpose of theater? Why do people do theater? To kind of see where they were at with that, to see how much thinking they've been doing. Having fun, biggest answer. It's fun.
Okay, honest.
Express oneself, pretending to be other people. It was very surface, not invalid in any way, just very surface on that level. And then I said, well, let's get a little bit more information here. Let's hear from some of the professionals in the field of what theater means to them and what they feel theater can be used for, and its purpose and its impact and whatnot. So some of the various quotes that I used were from Stella Adler, Willem Dafoe, Marianne Elliott, Harold Prince, of course, Brian Stokes Mitchell. I just found these really poignant quotes that were not too lofty either. They weren't too technical. They hit up general concepts, but a range of concepts. Stella Adler, actually, the quote that I used from hers, where she talks about the meaning of the word theater and drama. It's a Greek word. It means like the seeing place. It's where we see the truth about life. And we know, of course, ancient Greek drama is all about exposing the truth and coming together to kind of point out the flaws of what we see, or make fun of what we're seeing in the life of their Greek culture. The ancients, of course, were huge on that, making fun of, poking, literally taking what was happening in their life and putting it on the stage and exposing it. Willem Dafoe's quote was mostly about challenging how we think as an audience, challenging how we ourselves as actors and creators think, how we can provoke that relationship to kind of develop over the course of a production, watching and doing. Marianne Elliott, her quote was primarily about the collaboration, that theater is not just one person. It can be. I mean, you can have a one-person show. Sure. That person will be hustling quite a bit. So as soon as you realize, hey, wow, you're going to turn the lights on for me? Awesome. Now we have a two-person show. And it's going to be a lot more smooth, probably. But we understand that it is definitely collaborative, and it's multiple minds, multiple perspectives coming together to create something larger than every one person involved in that. Harold Prince discussed the various theater itself and his love of the black box theater, because it is this like blank canvas, but there's a limit. I mean, you are in the space that you are in. However, through the use of provoking imagination, both sides of the curtain, audience and actors and designers, we can expand the imagination really to an unlimited, vast expanse, which was pretty beautiful, I thought.
Right.
And then we have Brian Stokes Mitchell, his quote, which I really do love. It's about the power to transform people through the magic experience that theater is, changing the way that we think, changing the way that we feel, completely changing lives, potentially, if you click with someone, maybe just one person in the audience in a certain way. The power of change, So that was kind of what I prefaced them with after this little little inciting question. I said, well, let's hear what the professionals have to say, and then I posed the question again.
Right.
And I said, has any of this changed any of your minds, or at least allowed you to see things a little more deeply? And they did. They did recognize. They were able to express that theater tells about the world. You can create a world of your own and present it to other people. You can provoke change. You can change minds. You can change viewpoints. You can open minds that were once closed. Sometimes you're going to come into conflict. Perhaps some people, their minds close a little bit when they say, I don't like that idea. And then all of a sudden, we've sparked some conflict, which means you sparked conversation, which is really a beautiful thing. And they realize that they have an opportunity to really share a message, a lesson, something that they want to express and send out to the world beyond, a playful character that maybe they gave them the giggles and like, that would be so funny to make, to develop. Well, let's see now, is there even more we can do with this character that's so funny? What is your character? How do they grow? How do they learn? How do they change? How can we reflect that for others to kind of maybe ask themselves those same questions and find growth in their own world? So.
Exactly, and honestly, Allie, hearing you discuss these different dimensions and the way that you do really helps me, and I would imagine our colleagues, understand the many dimensions and nuances of the theater, and it's really quite complex.
Oh yes, and this is only one tiny facet. I mean, you ask anybody that is involved in this craft, and you're going to get a different answer. Their own take on it. So.
Which is wonderful, and there's so much room for all of it.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to make sure that my kids understood is that. And I started this last year with some kids in the same meeting. I reminded them that they're not just kids. Like at the moment that they are in their lives, they've got a lot of adults telling them what they need to do, where they need to be in that structure. That's necessary, of course. But I wanted them to recognize that they have so much more power and influence than they may give themselves credit for, or that they may even realize just yet. And to be able to embrace the empowerment of what a theatrical voice can provide for young actors, that I really wanted to drive home with them. And I shared that with them. I said, beyond through your exploration of your emotions and that exploring how you see the world, there's no really, kids see it in such a particular way that adults sometimes have forgotten how to see the world in this fresh new way, and they're there to show us that they have the perspective that the adults in the room do not, and it's valuable and it's worth talking about and worth sharing about. And again, that can then provoke and prompt the positive changes that they hope to see. They have that power, and I wanted them to be very aware of that as well moving forward. So
that's a wonderful message that, again, I think, as with a lot of the activities you do, is not just rhetoric that is sort of sterile and removed from actual experience, but I think given the curriculum as you've laid it out, they can in fact experience what it is to find that voice, to develop that voice, what kinds of messages they'd like to send, how best would they like to communicate. So you've given them such a great platform, and now are cheering them on to take full advantage of it. And I imagine the degree to which they take advantage of it and what they choose to do with it is something that is a true process.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And speaking of which, that leads me to my next question, because when you told me about the pulling back of the lens in this particular session, it reminded me, and our colleagues may recall, in the very beginning of this year of the drama club, in essence, Allie opened with the question, what does the theater mean to you? And thinking about what drew them to the theater and what they hoped to accomplish. And now reflecting on this discussion that you just described to us and comparing the two, do you see that process? Do you see a difference in their development in terms of everything from their depth of understanding to their maturity, higher level thinking, and of course, theatrical experience?
I am, yeah. We are at that point in the year where we have kind of crossed a new little threshold of development. It's a really interesting time of year too for my veteran kids, because now they're becoming like older veterans, if you could say that. Like they're still in middle school, and they've had 1 year or 2 years under their belt, but the way that they speak about their ideas related to the craft and whatnot, it's a lot more articulated, a lot more eloquent. Word choice is more clear, which I really appreciate. And in the younger, and they're also sort of, they're carrying it a little bit more. You know what I mean? And the fact, like you had mentioned in the beginning of our talk today, that the kids are taking more of the roles that I initiated in the beginning of the year, that's also definitely a sign. They get it, they're understanding. We're all working towards the same goal. There's things like chain of command. A group of 8th graders just said 5, 4, 3. Ooh, the rest are gonna like be quiet. And it's not taking advantage of their higher up status, if you will. It's really just more about experience. It's more that they're embodying a little bit more of the intention that I had hoped to instill within them. And it does trickle down, too, to the ideas that I'm seeing on the stage as they carry them out, staying more true to the objectives that we had talked about, the specific skills. They're less distracted and less trying to make something funny, even if it doesn't need to be at that moment.
Interesting.
So there is a maturity that I'm really starting to come through. And there's also a way in which my energy is shifting. I'm not serious per se, but it's definitely, we have turned the page, and now it's time to really dig our heels in, and they're picking up on that energy too from me. It's not an urgency thing. It's like, okay, next step, boom, now here we are, let's get ready to do this. And I think that there's definitely, they've followed in tow with that, which is pretty great. So
that's so wonderful. I think that you, in these few statements, just outlined the very definition of process over time, and I think reinforcing once again your initial goal in, I think, starting the drama club, to make sure it is a student-centric enterprise.
Yes.
And from what you're saying now, we're seeing the fruits of your labor laying the groundwork to make it so. And I think the proof is in the pudding, and it'll be interesting to see just how much more they have it in their bones as they move into this more kind of, I'm taking off on what you just said, serious, a little more intense period now, as they are creating and putting together an actual show. And I think, and to be able to probably come off of that in June and really have, I would guess, a comprehensive sense of ownership of this.
Yeah, and don't be mistaken, this pudding is going to spill all over the place 6 or 7 times. It's gonna get messy because it is process, but recognizing all that you've stated, that's begun, and that's very exciting. And it's okay when the pudding spills everywhere. It's a lesson there. We clean it up and we say, okay, what happened here? It's all good. It's all the little failures and the little stumblings along the way. They're integral to the process.
I was going to say, process is messy by definition. Life is messy by definition, and it's great that you remind us about that. And it's not that you're doing something wrong, but rather that it is simply part and parcel of the process. So at this point, all of the students then discussed with Allie the pitch meeting guidelines, which were these. Anyone with an idea would raise his or her hand, and when Allie called on that particular student, he or she would go to the head of the table and clearly explain, or what we would call pitch, his or her idea to the rest of the students in the club. And Allie noted to those who would be listening that they should feel free to ask questions to gain greater clarity about the idea, and also brainstorm any potential limitations that would need to be considered when determining whether or not that particular idea, in fact, is worth investigating or even viable. So, Allie, would you share with us how the pitch meeting went, and also give us a sense of the range of types of ideas that were presented?
It's quite a range.
If only we could have been a fly on the wall to see this.
I know. Well, in the beginning, as we mentioned, like 30 kids showed up, and I know that there were like another group of 4 or 5 kids that just couldn't be there that day. So we're going to be looking at some big numbers potentially.
Wow. And
so I was like, all right, pitch meeting, like it's big, exciting. I had announcements in the school, like the whole thing, all of this, and they know what it is. And I was like, all right, my keyboard ready. Who's got the first? It's like crickets. I was like, guys, like this isn't my pitch meeting. This is your pitch meeting. Let's pitch some ideas. And slowly but surely, when they started to come up, I reminded them, be brave. Like I have a lot of younger kids that I know have ideas, but they're shy. It's an intimidating circumstance. I purposely make it stressful. I don't think all stress is bad for kids. I think that learning to manage under certain circumstances that put pressure on us is how we become stronger under these circumstances. So, we have a very long table, like remember those old lunch tables, or like the benches on the side or whatever. I've stacked like 3 of them in a row. All the kids are sitting all along it, and they're all sitting there like this, looking at you. So all these faces are looking at you, and you've got to come to the head of the table, and you have to, like you had said, clearly, express your ideas, etc. So I said, guys, be brave. This is your chance. If you have anything, bring it up. This is why we're here. This is for you. So by the end of the time together, we had 21 ideas, and I was like, okay, we have something to work with here.
That's right.
So I also asked the kids to brainstorm and think about full cast opportunities, because you might have just had a kid come up with a couple of other friends, and they were like, we want to do this, and we all have it all figured out, and that's going to be great. And we're like, okay, good, awesome. But I really do, no matter what, like to have at least one sort of segment in the showcase that is every kid in some way, so that we include everybody, not just like everybody gets a role, but it's functional. I want them to recognize, wow, like look at everybody in the room. We all were part of this one. Like we all worked together to make this one happen. So and one of the kids suggested opening and closing, kind of bookending with like a musical number with choreography. Immediately I was like, that's going to be hard, which is okay, not a problem. But I do know how much time and energy that takes, which is great. I hope that they are up to that challenge, especially if there are going to be 30 bodies involved. Doesn't mean it's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but it was, it was ambitious, and I like that. I think that that's great if they can pull it off, and depending on whether or not it's original or not, it might be kind of like taking a tune and putting their own lyrics to it, something like that. But I don't think that it's impossible by any means. But I thought that was a really cute idea to kind of include everybody structurally for the events, for that actual production. It makes sense. So I like that they were thinking of that. But as you said, I mean, we have some a range. There's a range of ideas. Very simple ideas include, a very adorable little 6th grader coming up to the front of the table, and she's like, I'm not sure where this can go, but maybe there's like a pirate fighting a pineapple. And I'm like, okay. Can you expand on that? She's like, well, I just thought it would be really funny. And she's not wrong. Like, that would be funny. Like somehow, if you can create context around this scenario, all of a sudden, this is very bizarre. This is very avant-garde. Like, why is this pirate so angry at this pineapple? What's going on here? There's a story you can develop. A simple little idea. Right. Now, a lot of those occur, maybe 10 little nuggets like that occur, and that's when we start to think about, okay, well, can we take this, and put these together under some umbrella idea of like what that kid said over there. So, for example, one of our very complex examples is Choose Your Own Adventure, which I love. It's hard. It's challenging for them. It's challenging for the kids in the booth, because literally what we're talking about here, if you're not familiar, is the audience kind of decides what happens to the various characters, right? So we get to a point in the scene, something is going to trigger an instance where we have an audience vote, sort of like an MC. We have done this, so I can vouch that it is possible. Okay. It's very challenging, but it is possible, and the kids did an excellent job somehow working in a way of pausing at a certain moment, having a character come on, pose the vote to the audience, and then seamlessly go right into what the audience chose. What this means, though, is that kids have to memorize, learn blocking and script and tech cues for all the variables that could potentially happen. And it will not be necessarily in an order that you've rehearsed. They have to be ready to take this scene that might be out of place because they chose that way, but really what that means, then we're going to end up over here, but now the scene that was going to maybe track this way, not going to track that way anymore, now we're over here. Which also means you're in your script book in the booth flipping back and forth to different cues that align with the moment of script, not so much the linear aspect of the scene.
Wow.
So it's all over the place. But a 7th grader wrote one a few years ago, and the kids did it, and they did an amazing job with it, and it was seamless. Yeah, it was. The booth, I think, was probably the craziest place compared to the kids on the stage. Right. Even though there was some pretty interesting, there was like a portal and going back in time. Like, it was very, very, very creative. But yeah, the booth was like papers flying. I mean, not literally, we were very organized, but like if you could like turn it into a cartoon and see what's happening, like if our alter egos would be like, ah! Like everything is like, what did she say? Is she doing that? Okay, go. Hit the Q 17. All right, now we're in Q 32. No, back to 17. Like, you literally are doing that. So very complex, but really strong if successful.
Right.
So you have something, the student or the group of kids that had posed that, they didn't have a storyline in mind. They just knew that could be a cool idea. But maybe somewhere in this wacky story, there's a pirate and there's a pineapple. You know what I mean? So we can try and include as many ideas as we can with these little tiny nuggets. And then something like the complex scene, we sort of fill some of those holes. Another example of complexity would be a group of 8th grade boys they came up and they said, we want to do a cringe scene. And I was like, can you explain? I think I knew what they meant, but I had them explain. They're like, we just want to like really capture like awkwardness. And I'm like, okay, that would be very interesting. And they're like, and we want to have audience participation. And I'm like, okay, that's cool too. Why is this complex? Well, it's really hard to cultivate truly awkward situations that are not spontaneously happening, or sometimes cringeworthy could turn into like mean-spirited, depending on if there's like a butt of a joke or something like that. So we get into less of a technical complexity and more of like a nuanced complexity. How are we going to create something that's cringeworthy? What does that even mean? What makes you cringe may not make me cringe.
Very good point.
Do you know what I mean? So we get complex more in like literally what is the context of the material here, not how we're going to pull it off. So that's very complicated. Then you get into, you know, human psychology and like, and is there a boundary line? Is there a line that we don't want to cross? Like if there's like an appropriateness thing or mean-spirited, like I've mentioned, or something like that. And you have to consider these things, you know.
And especially you're in a school setting, as opposed to an adult
it's not SNL, it's not Upright Citizens, where you can do what, you know. It's there are and you know we are founded on respect and whatnot. We do talk about satire. We do talk about poking fun and things like that. It's not all just like rainbows and happy things. They get dark. I allow them to explore and get dark if they need to, or get mean if they need to. Even if we're just sort of exorcising something out and we find ourselves in a different place at the end of it, because they might realize, oh yeah, that's not really funny, that's just mean. I'm like, good realization. You know, so we can play it out and see, because I want them to kind of figure that out. And then in terms of like what instantly seems viable, that's when you're like, oh, good. Yes, this can work. I had a student who has been really obsessed with Matilda. She saw it, she loves it, she wants to play it. And I feel like there's definitely something there for that. We talked about fan fiction because, you know, there's levels of rights, royalties, things like that. But as an 11-year-old little girl who loves a character, I'm not going to be like, you can't be her. Like, we'll figure out a way to make this work. So we talked about fan fiction and cultivating stories that she can come up with, like the next chapter that she will write, or, you know, maybe include part of a song that we can within the limit that you can, and then sort of spin off of that into like another scene that she can write on her own with a group of kids and things like that. And I really thought that was sweet. I don't want to. The whole point of this is for kids to kind of extend themselves, and if that's her dream role and she wants to creatively kind of give herself that chance, I don't want to hold her back. I'm hoping that we can certainly work on developing that. And then there's themes or ideas that become viable. We don't necessarily have a full plot line, but a couple of 7th grade girls, I think, had come up and they were like, we want to do something where like clashing personalities find common ground. We've seen, you know, 100 different things like that. But their take on it, again, back to that kid voice.
Exactly.
That middle school experience. You know, we have a lot of things out there where adults have written stories about kids and say, hey, kids, watch this. This is what you need to know. Well, why don't we hear from the kids on what they think about their own experience, you know? So there's some realistic opportunities for them to play out a story that is totally viable. I mean, they, you know, and create, you know, and they can come up with something, I'm sure, if they were interested.
And that example of an idea, I think, permeates the middle school milieu.
It's like
I think they would have no problem finding 100 examples because, fortunately or unfortunately, this is, you know, goes on all the time.
It does. Yeah. It's like, I often think too with young people in particular, the theater is such a laboratory, especially for adolescents that have all these new feelings and they don't know what to do with them. They don't know necessarily what questions they can ask. They may not even know what questions to ask or who to ask. So if they can kind of play out some of these emotions in context that they've created, you can work out how your own interpretation of these feelings are and then have those skills when you actually are dealing with them in real life. So we can take this laboratory space, like role play, this lab of this, you know, this petri dish of adolescence.
All
this stuff that's going to grow out of it. But then have these tools, you know, it's like almost like they've done it before. They gain experience in a safe context, a safe environment, without the confusion and the veils of judgment and things like that we all have to deal with in the real world. So to give them that opportunity, telling them you have this opportunity, hash things out if necessary, and in effect teaching others, going back to that lesson moral, you know. So It was a productive meeting.
It sounds amazing.
It was really cool. Yeah.
You had said you had talked about assembling the nuggets, so to speak, perhaps into categories or groups, and to make it workable. So you'll do that on your own and then come in with that into the next meeting and kick off the next meeting from that place? How will you do that?
Well, what I'll do, like I had mentioned with the whole pineapple thing, I'll see what could go together and group them, like you had described. Nothing is set in stone ever. It's just when you have a list of random things on a screen, let's say we're all looking at the same screen, like on a big, smart board or something like that, it's hard. You don't necessarily see what could be. With my experience, that's what I'm there for. I'm there to show them. I'm seeing some connections. Do you see these connections? Do these connections seem viable to you? Do you see other connections? Should we pull this out of here, maybe tuck it under there? I had a lot of competitive ideas, and what I mean by that is Broadway characters, coming together for some reason, or video game characters in a battle royale, or a lot of competition with these different interesting, conflicting parties. And then another kid was game show, and I was like, well, what if we can somehow take these characters and put them in a game show context, because then you sort of can hit a lot of the different competitive things that we're talking about, but then give it context and a storyline, and it simplifies it too, because if everything's just kind of like we don't know what's going to happen here, we can kind of give it an umbrella. Does it have to be a game show? No, but I mean, just model for them, how can we take different ideas and group them and give them structure, which can then be played with. But like we were saying too, with language and whatnot, you need to learn the rules before we can break them. We need to give some structure before we can really start messing with those ideas. So we also discussed, and we're going to discuss in more detail, inspiration versus plagiarism. Because that does happen. I'll get an idea or two from a kid, and it's something that they saw off of YouTube. They didn't realize necessarily that they totally just copied an exact idea. So we'll discuss. We discuss, okay, so I did a little research, I found this, it's the same exact thing. Do you really like it? Meaning, are you emulating it or copying it because you really like it? And sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, it's so funny, we should do it too. Or they say, oh wow, I didn't realize it was the same thing. I thought this was funny and I thought mine was different. So we just discuss how to kind of unravel that, if that ever arises too. Because it does. The kids don't necessarily, they inadvertently steal or plagiarize or, borrow, if you will. And we just need to kind of delineate that inspiration versus plagiarism. So it is in fact their own. If it's not their own, then credit needs to be given in the appropriate way. If they're choosing to move forward, or they really want to feel, they really feel tied to an idea and they can make it viable in some way. If it's very close to an idea, then we need to definitely look into ways to give the proper credit, whether the credit is embedded in the storyline itself in some way, or we contact the parties and make sure that we're doing what we need to do for that. So yeah, we'll see.
And I would imagine that, as you say, that's not always an easy thing to parse out if you've been exposed to a concept, an idea, even a particular execution at some point in time. And over time, your brain has then taken that and assembled it in all kinds of different ways. I imagine it can be very difficult to pull out the different pieces and make that kind of determination. But I think it's great that you are using, again, this platform to introduce this idea, because, of course, the issue of plagiarism is a hot topic in the academic realm, in the journalistic realm, in the arts, in so many different arenas. And I think really getting some experience in making those kinds of determinations when it's not an outright deliberate theft, if you will.
Yeah, I don't think any of the kids are trying to like hide that happened. If anything, they're like, oh yeah, I saw it on YouTube yesterday. I'm like, okay, let's have a chat. So it's never like malicious or trying to be like covering up or anything like that. But it is something definitely to discuss, especially now that things are so easily published and out there, you know.
That's exactly right. So that maybe the next time in whatever environment they're a part of, that will be hopefully a consideration. And that there's an awareness that perhaps didn't exist before. So we certainly look forward to seeing how these nuggets, as you say, begin to coalesce. Again, kick-started by Allie grouping them as she described, and then...
Which can always change.
Right, nothing's in stone, but a place to start, as you say. Structure, providing structure which I imagine they can then work
and
within.
Modeling vision when there isn't a lot of structure around it yet, creating the scaffolding.
So we'll look forward to hearing more about how you actually did that in the next meeting. So don't go away. Stay glued to our videocast, because this will be very, very interesting to, literally be part of this process as it unfolds. So Allie, thank you once again. Looking forward to seeing how everything is fleshed out, stage one, shall we say, next week. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.
Thank you.